The snow had been falling since 4 in the morning. By the time Elliot Voss stepped off the subway at Midtown, the city had taken on that particular stillness that only heavy snowfall can produce, the muted quality of a room with thick curtains drawn, the way sound travels differently when the air is full of white. His breath clouded in front of him. He pulled his scarf tighter, not because he was cold, but out of habit. He had worn this same scarf, dark navy wool, fraying slightly at the left edge for 6 winters now. His daughter, Cassidy, had given it to him the Christmas she turned 4. She was 10 now. He paused at the corner of 53rd and Lexington and looked up at the Arrowwood Tower. 43 floors of black glass and brushed steel, the building announced itself with the particular arrogance of permanent capital. The lobby was visible from the street-polished marble floors, a reception desk staffed by 2 young women in matching charcoal blazers, a row of security gates with brushed nickel finish. A Christmas tree stood near the entrance, 12 feet tall, decorated entirely in white and gold. No tinsel, no color, nothing that might suggest warmth. Elliot adjusted the strap of his leather messenger bag, checked the time, 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, and walked toward the revolving door. The bag was old. Not vintage old. Not the kind of old that fashion magazines call heritage and sell at a premium. Just old. The leather had cracked along the left buckle and been repaired with a strip of electrical tape, black against brown. The bag had been with him through 14 years of legal work. 3 cross-country moves, a marriage, a funeral, and approximately 9,000 cups of gas station coffee. It contained, at this moment, a laptop, a thermos of the same gas station coffee, a small stuffed rabbit that Cassidy had insisted he carry for good luck, and a manila folder with 43 pages of documents that he had spent the last 2 weeks reading, with the kind of care most people reserve for reading the fine print on a life insurance policy, which, in a manner of speaking, was exactly what this was. The lobby guard scanned his temporary visitor badge and waved him through with the particular brand of indifference that security personnel develop after years of waving through people they will never remember. Elliot rode the elevator to the 38th floor, watching the numbers climb in silence. He was there as an outside contractor, brought in town. Arrowwood Capital's legal department, at the last minute technically, 3 days ago after their lead contract attorney had fractured 2 ribs in a skiing accident in Vermont, and the deal timeline couldn't be moved. Someone at the firm had called someone who had called someone, and eventually the call had found its way to Elliot, who worked out of a 2-room office above a dry cleaner in Chelsea, and charged rates that a mid-tier associate at a white shoe firm would consider an insult. His job was simple: review the documentation for the Hargrove Meridian acquisition, confirm everything was in order, and be present at the signing meeting as a formal witness. Grunt work, the kind of assignment that exists to give a deal legal cover, not substance. He had said yes because he needed the money and because Cassidy's school was asking for a deposit on the spring science trip to Washington, D.C. The elevator opened. A woman at the assistant's desk looked up, assessed him in approximately 1 second, the old bag, the navy coat, the scarf, and smiled. The smile of a person who has decided the stranger before them is not worth the full voltage of professional attention. Mr. Voss? Conference room B, down the hall. They're setting up. You're welcome to wait. He thanked her and walked down the hall. The conference room was enormous. A table of dark walnut ran its length, surrounded by 16 chairs in black leather. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city, white with snow. Someone had placed small crystal glasses at each setting and filled them with water. There were 3 printed agendas on the table, face down, and a projector already casting blue light on the screen at the far end. Elliot found the seat nearest the door, the seat nobody wants, because it's furthest from the screen and closest to foot traffic, and sat down. He opened his bag, removed the manila folder, and began reading from the beginning. Again, for what was technically the 11th time, the stuffed rabbit sat in the open bag. Its one remaining button eye caught the overhead light. He was halfway through page 7 when the rest of them arrived. They entered the way people with authority always enter. The room reorganized itself around them. First came the junior associates, 3 of them, mid-20s, carrying laptops and the cultivated look of people who haven't slept but would rather die than admit it. Then 2 senior directors, both male, both in dark suits of the kind that cost more than Elliot's monthly rent. They spoke to each other in low voices as they settled into their seats, glancing at their phones with the reflexive anxiety of people who believe the world requires their constant supervision. Then she walked in. Victoria Hargrove Crane was 38 years old, and she carried herself the way a very expensive building carries itself, with the calm certainty that its presence alone sets the terms of the surrounding space. She was the CEO of Arrowwood Capital, had been for 6 years, and in those 6 years, she had taken a mid-sized private equity firm and turned it into a $40 billion platform that institutional investors called the most disciplined operation in alternative assets. She wore a slate gray suit, no jewelry except a thin watch on her left wrist, and her hair was pulled back in a manner that suggested she had decided that morning to have no patience for anything that wasn't essential. She scanned the room as she entered. Her eyes moved over the associates, over the directors, over the crystal glasses and the printed agendas, and then they landed on Elliot, in the corner seat with the battered bag and the worn coat, and for just a moment, something passed across her face, not quite contempt, but the near cousin of it. The mild, effortless dismissal of someone who has assessed an object and found it beneath valuation. She did not introduce herself to him. The Hargrove Meridian deal had been 18 months in the making. Meridian Strategic Partners, the firm on the other side of the table, was a London-based infrastructure investment group with significant holdings in European port operations and, more relevantly, a portfolio of logistics technology patents that Arrowwood wanted access to. The acquisition price was $90 million. For Victoria, this was not the largest deal she had ever done. It was, however, the one she had fought hardest to structure. 3 representatives from Meridian arrived at 9 sharp, led by their managing partner, a polished Englishman named Gerald Ashworth, who had the particular quality of people who have been handsome in their youth and have since developed the confidence of a man who knows the impression he once made and believes it still holds. He shook hands with Victoria at the head of the table, and the 2 of them conducted the opening pleasantries with the efficiency of people who have already decided the outcome and are simply performing the ceremony of decision-making for the benefit of those in the room. At 9:14, Victoria began walking through the deal structure. She was good. Elliot would grant her that without reservation. She commanded the room the way a concert conductor commands an orchestra, not through volume, but through precision. She knew every number. She could cite every clause. She moved through the 47-page contract the way a person moves through a familiar building in the dark. No hesitation, no false turns. The associates took notes. The directors nodded. Gerald Ashworth leaned back in his chair and allowed himself to look slightly bored, which is the power move of a man who believes the deal is already done. Nobody looked at Elliot. He sat in his corner, reading. He was on page 31 now. His coffee had gone cold. On the table in front of him, the manila folder was open, and the pages were covered in his handwriting, blue ink, small and dense, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who learned to take notes before laptops existed. Margin annotations, circled phrases, a small asterisk beside a clause on page 29 and a larger, boxed notation beside a subsection on page 32. He turned to page 34, found what he was looking for, read it a third time. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to page 29 and read the 2 pages together, side by side. The way you hold 2 photographs next to each other to find the thing that's wrong. He found it again. He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. Outside, the snow was still falling. The moment came at 10:22 a.m., when Victoria asked for the formal legal review. Before we proceed to execution, I want to confirm that our documentation team has reviewed all attached schedules. She looked directly at Elliot for the first time since he had sat down. The look was brief and carried within it the particular voltage of a woman who had not sought this addition to her morning and was prepared to treat it as a formality. She glanced at the printed roster in front of her boss. Yes, Elliot said. You've been brought in as outside review. I trust you've had adequate time to familiarize yourself with the materials, given your circumstances. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough. One of the senior directors, a broad-shouldered man named Craig Whitfield, looked up from his phone. Victoria continued, "I understand you work independently. Consulting basis." The word independently was pitched with a delicacy that turned it into something adjacent to alone. She tilted her head slightly. "Single practice. Is that right?" "That's right," Elliot said. "And you're managing that alongside." She glanced at something. It might have been the roster. It might have been nothing. A family situation. "Correct? I have a daughter," Elliot said. "She's 10. Victoria held his gaze for a moment. That must make scheduling interesting. She let the thought sit in the air just long enough. And then, in a voice pitched perfectly for a room of 16 people, she said, "So single dad. Solo practice." She said it the way you might say, "Well, bless your heart. I'm sure you've done your best with the timeline we gave you." A small sound moved through the room. Not quite laughter. The near cousin of it, Gerald Ashworth, examined his watch. Craig Whitfield pressed his lips together in the suppressed smile of a man who is pleased the attention is on someone else. Elliot did not react. He did not shift in his chair. He did not color or clear his throat or look away. He looked at Victoria Hargrove Crane with the steady, undisturbed attention of someone watching weather from inside a house, observing it, not alarmed by it, and he smiled. A small, quiet smile, the kind that doesn't ask anything of the person it's directed at. "I've had time," he said. "Thank you." Then he looked back down at his folder. In the bag at his feet, the stuffed rabbit's single-button eye caught the light and gave nothing back. Inside his chest, something moved, not anger, not the hot surge of wounded pride. Something cooler. A recognition. The kind of clarity that comes when everything you've been watching finally arranges itself into the shape you suspected it would take. He had been at this table 6 minutes in his mind before he ever walked into the building. He turned to the last page of his notes and drew a small rectangle around a single sentence. Clause 14. 3. Governing rights transition upon operational milestone. He underlined it once, capped his pen. Victoria moved through the execution phase with the fluency of a surgeon who has performed the same procedure 100 times. The contract, by all visible measures, was a masterwork. 18 months of negotiation had produced a document so dense with cross-reference schedules, so layered with defined terms and carve-outs and protective covenants, that it gave any reasonable reader the impression of a thing built to last fortress architecture in legal language. The Arrowwood directors had reviewed it. 2 rounds of external counsel had reviewed it. Meridian's own legal team had reviewed it. Victoria had reviewed it personally. The document had, in the parlance of sophisticated deal-making, been scrubbed clean. Gerald Ashworth, for his part, looked like a man in the final pleasant moments of a very long wait. He had the relaxed quality of a chess player who has seen the board reach the configuration he prepared for and is simply waiting for the other side to notice. "The schedules are incorporated by reference," Victoria said. "Exhibits A through G are annexed. The representations and warranties in Article 8 survive closing for a period of 24 months. Nods around the table, the 3 associates typed. Conditions to closing are satisfied as of this morning's date." She paused. "The wire instructions for the initial tranche are confirmed." Her CFO, a compact, gray-haired woman named Dana Forsyth, nodded from the far end of the table. "Confirmed. Funds are staged. Then I believe we're ready for execution." Gerald Ashworth uncapped a pen. "A Mont Blanc," Elliot noted. "The kind of pen a person carries when they believe that signing their name is a performance worth accessorizing." Victoria reached for her own pen. "Before we proceed." The words came from the corner seat. They were quiet words. They were said without urgency, in a voice pitched for a room where everything else had gone momentarily still, which is exactly what everything had done, by instinct, the way animals go still when something in the register of sound has shifted. Elliot Voss had placed a single document on the table in front of him. It was not the main contract. It was a single page, a supplementary analysis, printed on plain white paper, no letterhead, something he had prepared himself at his desk at 1 in the morning, while Cassidy slept in the next room, and the radiator ticked, and the city outside was quieter than it ever gets. He did not slide it down the table. He did not pass it to anyone. He simply placed it in front of himself, and he said, "I think we should revisit Clause 14.3 before execution." Victoria looked at him with the expression of a person who has encountered an inconvenience that she has not yet decided how to classify. "Mr. Voss." Her voice was contained, precise. "We've had 3 rounds of external review. This document has been examined by some of the most experienced transactional attorneys in this market." "I understand," Elliot said. "And you have a concern." "I have an observation," he said. "About a subclause." Craig Whitfield exhaled. It was the exhale of a man who believes he has already seen the end of the film. Gerald Ashworth's expression did not change, but his hand, the hand holding the Mont Blanc, lowered slightly. And Elliot noticed. Clause 14.3 addresses the transition of operational governance rights, Elliot said. He did not consult his notes. He spoke from the document in his memory, which is a different document entirely from the one on the page, because it has been read slowly and in sequence, and with full attention to what it means, not merely what it says. The clause specifies that under certain performance milestone conditions, governance rights associated with the acquired technology portfolio can be, and I'm reading directly, reassigned to the originating entity for the purposes of operational continuity. He paused. "The originating entity," he said, "is Meridian Strategic Partners. A beat, under a standard acquisition structure. That's an unusual carve-out," he said. "Typically, we would expect governance rights to transfer unconditionally at closing. But this clause creates a contingency. If the technology portfolio fails to achieve the defined operational milestones which are detailed in Schedule D, Exhibit 4 within 180 days of closing, then governance rights revert, not to a negotiated neutral position, back to Meridian." The room had gone very quiet. "The operational milestones in Schedule D, Exhibit 4, Elliot continued, require a 30% reduction in logistics processing latency across the full patent portfolio." He let that sentence breathe for a moment. The patents were acquired as a portfolio play. Most of them are pre-integration stage. 30% latency reduction across the full portfolio in 6 months, is, he chose the word carefully, aggressive. He looked at Dana Forsyth, the CFO. "Based on the due diligence report in Exhibit C, which I also reviewed, the current latency baseline for 2 of the 7 core patents is not yet established. The benchmark hasn't been set, which means the milestone in Schedule D is, in practical terms, unmeasurable for those patents." He paused again. "Unmeasurable milestones cannot be verified as met. Unverified milestones create dispute rights. Dispute rights under 14.3b allow Meridian to assert non-performance and trigger the reversion clause." He picked up the single page he had placed on the table and held it up briefly before setting it back down. "This is a summary of those provisions, cross-referenced with the Schedule D definitions and the due diligence gaps. I thought it might be useful to have it in one place before we proceed." He folded his hands on the table. Outside, the snow was still falling. 53rd and Lexington, 40 stories down, was invisible. Nobody spoke. The duration of the silence was approximately 30 seconds. It felt considerably longer. Marcus T., the youngest of the 3 associates, 26, Harvard Law, 1 year out, reached across the table and picked up the printed contract. His eyes moved to Clause 14.3. He read it once. He read it again. He found Schedule D and turned to Exhibit 4. His face did the thing that faces do when they have located, in a document they have already read 4 times, something they did not see. The color did not dramatically drain from his face. It was more precise than that, a careful, controlled rearrangement, the way a room looks when someone has quietly removed all the furniture. He looked up at Dana Forsyth. Dana Forsyth was already at her own copy of the contract. Craig Whitfield was watching Elliot with an expression that had moved, over the course of the last 90 seconds, from condescension to something he had not yet fully named. Victoria Hargrove Crane was reading Clause 14.3. She read it the way you read something when you are trying to find the flaw in the argument against it, and the flaw is not presenting itself. Her pen was on the table in front of her. She was not holding it. Gerald Ashworth, across the table, had shifted in his chair. The shift was minor 3 inches back. Perhaps, but in a room where everything had stopped it was visible. He looked at the man to his right, one of his own counsel. A compact woman named Patricia, who had the face of someone listening very hard to music no one else can hear. And Patricia was not looking back at him. Patricia was looking at the contract. The milestone definitions, Patricia said, quietly. She said it to no one in particular. Schedule D, Exhibit 4, Elliot said. Third paragraph. Patricia turned to it. Victoria had reached Schedule D. The room was a particular kind of quiet that Elliot recognized from other rooms, other tables, other documents, the quiet of a moment that has divided time into a before and an after, and everyone in the room is still processing which side they've ended up on. The benchmark isn't set, Dana Forsyth said. She said it in a voice that meant she was not saying it to the room. She was saying it to herself, confirming something. For 2 of the 7 patents, correct, Elliot said. Patents 3 and 5 in the portfolio annex. The due diligence notes acknowledge that those systems are in pre-integration phase, but the Schedule D milestone language applies to the portfolio as a whole, not to patents individually. Victoria looked up from the contract. She looked at Gerald Ashworth. Gerald Ashworth looked back at her, and in that exchange 2 seconds, across a walnut table, over crystal glasses still full of water, nobody had drunk, something was communicated that required no language at all. The silence broke when Craig Whitfield set his copy of the contract down and said, with the careful delivery of a man choosing every word, "Who are you?" It was not hostile. It was the question of someone who has received information that cannot be categorized without more information. Elliot looked at him. "I told you. Outside review. Voss Legal." "Voss Legal," Craig said. He turned the name over. "Chelsea, 2-room office." Above the dry cleaner, Elliot agreed. Before that, Elliot said nothing. Dana Forsyth had looked up from her contract. She was watching Elliot with an expression of careful recalibration. Craig Whitfield leaned forward slightly. The Pennington Alcott restructuring. 2018. That was yours. It was not a question. Pennington Alcott had been a pharmaceutical licensing dispute that had metastasized into a $220 million restructuring case with cross-border complications and a state attorney general who had decided to treat it as a political opportunity. It had taken 17 months and 4 separate jurisdictional filings, and it had ended with the company intact, and the Attorney General's case dismissed at the appellate level for reasons that had everything to do with one particular brief, which had been 73 pages long, and had demonstrated such precise command of the intersection of federal IP law and state securities regulation that the judge's written opinion had cited it 4 times. The brief had been written by Elliot Voss. He had been 31 years old. "I worked on that matter," Elliot said. "You wrote the Pennington brief," Craig said. "Greenfield Partners." "Before you." He stopped himself. "Before I left," Elliot said. The left sat in the room with its weight intact. He had been at Greenfield Partners for 6 years. Senior associate. Tracked for partnership. Handling the kind of complex transactional and litigation work that gets a lawyer's name spoken in certain rooms. Then his wife, Helen, had gotten sick. Then she had died. And the week after the funeral, Elliot had gone into the office and sat at his desk for 40 minutes, and then picked up his briefcase and walked out. And he had not been back. That had been 5 years ago. Cassidy had been 5. He had built Voss Legal. If a 2-room office above a dry cleaner qualified as something that could be built out of the remnants of a network that still remembered him, and a reputation that his absence had done nothing to diminish. He worked on what he chose to work on. He charged what he chose to charge. He was home every evening by 6. "The Meridian contract," Craig said. "You found this." "I found it because I read it," Elliot said, simply. "The whole thing, including the schedules." Craig looked at the contract in front of him. "All of our people read it," he said. And there was no defensiveness in it, just the flat acknowledgement of a fact that had become, in the last 4 minutes, bewildering to him. "I know," Elliot said. "It's a very long document. The relationship between 14.3b and Schedule D, Exhibit 4, Paragraph 3, is not obvious at first reading. It becomes obvious at about the 4th. He paused. "I've had time." He said the last 3 words with the same quiet steadiness with which he had said everything else. He did not inflect them. He did not emphasize "I've had." He did not make them into a rebuke. He simply gave them back, unchanged, to the room that had produced their mirror image an hour earlier. Victoria Hargrove Crane heard it. Victoria had not spoken since she read Clause 14.3. She had been reading, and she had been thinking, and she had been doing both of these things with the control of a person who has spent years cultivating the ability to be in crisis and appear to be in consideration. Her face was neutral. Her hands were still. The pen was on the table in front of her, uncapped, and she had not picked it up. Gerald Ashworth was speaking quietly to Patricia, his counsel, in a register designed not to carry across the table, but Patricia's responses, 2-word, clipped, carried the information that the conversation was not going well for him. Dana Forsyth had called someone on her phone and stepped to the edge of the room, speaking in a low voice with the careful urgency of a CFO who has realized that $90 million is about to be the subject of a very uncomfortable board call. Marcus T. had written 4 lines of notes, stopped, looked at them, and not written anything else. Victoria set the contract down. She looked at Gerald Ashworth. "Gerald," she said. It was 1 word. It contained an entire sentence. He looked at her. "The milestone definitions in Schedule D," she said, "Victoria, were deliberately drafted with 2 unestablished baselines," she said, "which your counsel knew." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to, which means the transition clause was never intended as a protective mechanism. It was intended as a trapdoor. The word trapdoor was precise and final. Gerald Ashworth said, "That is a characterization, that is an accurate description," Victoria said, "of a clause that would have allowed you to assert non-performance against an unmeasurable benchmark at the 6-month mark, trigger the reversion, and reclaim the governance rights while keeping the closing payment, which my legal team would have been obligated to contest in arbitration under English law in London." She paused. Given that the arbitration clause is also in Schedule D, the room was very still. Gerald Ashworth had the look of a man who has made a long-prepared move and watched it be quietly removed from the board before he could complete it. "I'll have my counsel reach out," he said, at last, "to discuss amendments." "Your counsel," Victoria said, "can reach out to Mr. Voss." She did not look at Gerald Ashworth after that. She looked at the contract. Then she looked up, across the table, and she looked at Elliot. He was collecting his pages, slowly, tucking them back into the manila folder, unhurried. The laptop was already back in the bag. The thermos was capped. He looked up and found her watching him. He did not perform the moment. He did not let it run long. He simply met her eyes for 1 full second, not with triumph, not with the vindication of someone who has waited for this, but with the calm of someone who has simply done what he came to do, and would now like to go home. Then he looked back at his folder, closed it, and slid it into the bag. The stuffed rabbit's button eye caught the light one more time. She caught him in the hallway. Victoria Hargrove Crane, CEO of Arrowwood Capital, 43 floors above 53rd and Lexington, in slate gray wool, and a watch that cost more than his car, caught up to Elliot Voss as he was waiting for the elevator, and she said, "Mr. Voss." He turned. She was not, he noticed, followed by anyone. She had left the room and walked the length of the hall without assistant, without associate, without the professional buffer that powerful people typically maintain between themselves and any interaction that might require something genuine. "A moment," she said. It was half question, which was as close as she had probably come to asking for something in quite a while. "Of course," he said. She stopped in front of him. For a moment she was quiet. Not performing the quiet. Not calculating it. But genuinely in it. The way people are quiet when they're doing something they don't do often. "The comment I made," she said, "at the beginning of the meeting. About your situation." A brief pause. "About being a single father." "Yes," he said. "It was dismissive," she said. "It was designed to be dismissive, which is worse. I said it in front of a room full of people because I had already decided you weren't worth taking seriously, and I was communicating that. To you, and to the room." She held his gaze. "That was wrong." Elliot looked at her for a moment. "I appreciate you saying that," he said. "I'm not saying it to be gracious," she said. "I'm saying it because it's accurate. And because you just in the course of about 6 minutes, using a single page of your own notes, prevented my company from losing control of a $90 million acquisition to a man who had been planning to take it from us for, at minimum, 3 months. And you did that while sitting in the corner seat. In a coat I was cataloging for being old." She paused. "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't," he said. "The apology is separate from the other." "I mean, you don't owe me more than an apology," he said. "The apology is sufficient. And I accept it." She was quiet for a moment. "Why did you take this assignment?" she said. "This isn't you could be at any firm. At partnership level. You know that." "Yes," he said. "Then why?" "Because I was available," he said. "And the assignment interested me." He paused. "And there's a science trip in the spring." She looked at him. "My daughter's school," he said. "Washington, D.C. They need a deposit." She processed this. He watched her processing it, the recalibration happening behind her eyes, the careful internal adjustment that comes when the frame through which you have been viewing something is replaced with a different one, and everything you were looking at looks different now, not because it changed, but because you're seeing it correctly for the first time. "You chose this," she said. It was not a question. It was an understanding. "I chose this," he said. He said it without the weight of tragedy, without the quiet martyrdom that people sometimes attach to sacrifices in order to make sure the sacrifice is witnessed. He said it the way a person states a fact about themselves that requires no defense and invites no pity, simply as a true thing, fully accepted, carrying neither regret nor performance. "I'm a lawyer," he said. "And I'm a father. The second one is the one I practice every day." He paused. "The first one doesn't go away, but it knows its place." Victoria Hargrove Crane looked at him with an expression that had, over the course of this conversation, moved from professional courtesy to something more careful and less classified. "You're remarkable," she said. She said it plainly. "The way you say something when you've stopped worrying about whether saying it is a power move." "I'm thorough," he said. "It's quieter." She offered him a position before he reached the elevator. Of course she did. She did it properly, not as a condition of the apology, not bundled into a single breath with the words that preceded it, but clearly, separately, with the deliberateness of a person making a business decision rather than performing a resolution. She said the firm needed someone who read contracts the way he read contracts, that she could create a role at the senior advisory level, that it would not require full-time hours, and could be structured to accommodate, and here she chose her words with a care she had not been using 3 hours ago, whatever schedule works for your life. Elliot listened to all of this. Then he said, "I'm going to say no." She nodded, as though she had known this was coming, and had offered anyway because she felt it needed to be offered. "If I change my mind," he said, "I know where you are." "You do," she said. "And if something comes up," he said, "something worth reading carefully, I'll call you," she said. He held out his hand. She shook it. There was in the handshake, he thought, afterward, walking to the elevator, a quality that most handshakes don't have. A recognition, the kind of recognition that exists between people who have, in a very compressed period of time, seen each other clearly. Not completely, Not the decades of context, the accumulated detail that makes a person fully knowable but clearly. The essential thing. The thing that is actually there. The elevator came. He stepped in. He turned and saw, through the closing doors, Victoria Hargrove Crane, walking back toward Conference Room B. She walked without the particular composite of performance and calculation with which she had walked through the door that morning. She walked like a person who has just been surprised by something and has not yet decided how to classify the feeling. He thought she would be all right. The lobby was warm. The marble floors reflected the overhead light in long, gold strips. The Christmas tree stood near the entrance, white and gold, 12 feet of measured elegance, and someone had placed a small orange at the base of it, a real orange, actual fruit, slightly out of place in all that tasteful restraint. He noticed it and thought, briefly, that whoever put it there had done something small and right. He signed out at the security desk. The guard handed him back his visitor badge, a laminated square that said temporary, and had his name printed in the wrong font, and Elliot dropped it in the return badges bin and walked toward the revolving door. Through the glass, the city was white, and standing in the small alcove beside the revolving door, wearing a red puffy coat and a hat with a pom-pom on top, reading a paperback about horses, with the devoted concentration that 10-year-olds bring to the things they love, was Cassidy. She looked up when she heard the door. Her face performed the particular expression that children have in the first instant they see a parent, the split second before anything is said, when the face simply is what it is, without editing, without management, just the whole feeling at once. She smiled. Then she went back to being 10. "You're done?" she said. "I'm done," he said. He sat down on the bench beside her. There was a bench, just inside the alcove, one of those thick marble benches that are beautiful and uncomfortable, and she leaned into him slightly, not dramatically, just the automatic lean of someone who has found the familiar thing and moved toward it without thinking. "Was it interesting?" she said. "Parts of it," he said. "The good kind of interesting?" He thought about this. About Clause 14.3. About a single page of notes on plain white paper, printed at 1 in the morning, while the radiator ticked. About a pen that was half-capped on a table, and a hand that had stopped moving. "Yes," he said. "The good kind." "Did you need the rabbit?" she asked. He reached into his bag and produced the stuffed rabbit, worn and slightly lopsided, its one good eye catching the lobby light, and held it out. She took it and tucked it into the pocket of her red coat, with the efficiency of a person who has a system for these things. "He did well," Elliot said. "He always does," she said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a 10-year-old who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by her convictions. He stood. She stood. She tucked her horsebook into her backpack and zipped it with one pull. He adjusted the strap of the old leather bag on his shoulder. He pushed the revolving door, and they stepped out into the cold. The snow was still falling. It was the late morning snow of a city that has accepted the weather and gone on working, not the dramatic storm of early morning, but the steady, generous accumulation of a day that intends to be white all the way to the end. The sidewalk was wet and tracked with boots. A taxi went by slowly. Amber light reflected on the snow. Someone across the street was walking a dog. 2 construction workers stood at the corner eating from paper bags. "What do you want for lunch?" Elliot asked. "Soup," she said. "The Italian kind, with the little pasta shapes. Pastina. That one. We have the stuff at home." "I know," she said, in the tone of someone who has already planned the meal. They walked east on 53rd. He took her hand and she let him. The way she was beginning to allow it less often now that she was 10, and aware of the social geometry of being 10, but she let him today because it was cold and snowy, and they were walking, and no one here knew her. The city moved around them. The snow fell through the spaces between the buildings, which are enormous spaces, lit white from above. His coat was old. Her pom-pom hat was red. The bag on his shoulder was heavy with a thermos and a manila folder and a laptop. And somewhere in there was the stuffed rabbit, retired to her pocket, which was where it belonged. Somewhere behind them, 43 floors above the snow, a woman in a slate-gray suit was sitting at a walnut table in Conference Room B, looking at a $90 million contract that would need to be renegotiated from the ground up, and beginning perhaps for the first time in a long time to think about what she had almost missed. But that was up there. Down here, there was Pastina. And snow. And the city all around them. Going about its enormous, indifferent, beautiful business. Elliot Voss, lawyer and father, walked with his daughter through it. He was not thinking about the document. He was thinking about the soup,